I went to a comedy show recently at which Ed got on stage. Ed, local comedian, and he complained that a comedy show he organized himself had become miserable to attend because so many of the comedians were obsessed with blaming the Jews for every considerable political problem. And his punchline was to point out the contrast, the incongruous contrast between this kind of anti Semitism and the attitudes these left wing comedians had toward punching up versus punching down comedy that was in any way racist, sexist, transphobic, that in any way included a slur. So he was drawing attention to the way in which these people would use the word Jew and blame political problems and social problems on the Jews, in contrast to how they talk about any other category of people. Now, this was a performance at a small comedy club. Every single person in the room was a comedian. I mean, maybe a couple of comedians brought along their girlfriends or boyfriends, but honestly, I don't even think there was that much diversity in terms of who was sitting there to hear it. And, I don't think he was trying to get laughs out of the crowd. I think he was actually really trying to unburden himself. Ed is the host of the comedy show that banned me, didn't want me to perform on stage anymore here. And Ed has come up to me and joked around with me and been friendly towards me several times. I do not know if he did that to kind of suggest that it wasn't his decision. That, he's the host of the show, but he's not necessarily in a position of executive control of the show. I don't know. And I don't know to what extent Ed hates me. If he hates me, he's got it down to a low simmer. Like, he seems to be cool with me when we meet up and chat at these different comedy events. Now, my perspective on this is worth making a YouTube video about. I have a lot to say on this very topic. In many contexts, I'm perceived as left-wing, and I am de facto left-wing. Like, I'm in the same political camp as the far left. For example, veganism. For example, ecology. Right? Now, I also have nothing in common with conservatives culturally in Canada, in the United States. Right? I don't believe in the things conservatives believe, and I don't make excuses for the things conservatives make excuses for. Real quick examples: global warming, right? Like, the conservative perspective on global warming in 2026, United States, Canada, England. I have no sympathy for these people, and they would perceive me as being further to the left than Bernie Sanders in really taking ecology seriously. And for me, this is linked to veganism, blah, blah, blah. You can fill in the blanks. So there are certain contexts in which I'm perceived as left-wing. Stand-up comedy is not one of them. I am, in effect, right-wing in the context of Canadian stand-up comedy in the 21st century. And I feel that in this culture, left-wing comedy is actually impossible. It's impracticable. It could change 20 years from now. The meaning of left and right change a lot in a 20-year period. But right now, I would go so far as to say there is no such thing as left-wing stand-up comedy. Two anecdotes really quickly. There was a left-wing comedy event here recently. And the left-wing events identify themselves as such, and some comedians are invited and other comedians are forbidden. Like, really, it's very clear. There's a stand-up comedy civil war here between left and right. And I'm telling you about this because in New York City, in Los Angeles, like all over the world, like anyone who cares about the performing arts, not just stand-up comedy. I have friends who are into like live punk rock music. I'm certain in your local punk rock scene, there's some kind of civil war, there's some kind of left-right dichotomy, there's something in some ways that's the same. This is a very specific case study, very specific set of examples we're talking about here. But I think you can relate to it. I think it actually has broader, political and historical significance than just what's happening in this small town, in this small and unimportant country, Canada. There's a left-wing event here recently, a couple weeks ago, and it was advertised as women and transgender people telling stories with applause being forbidden or discouraged, laughter being forbidden or discouraged. This was going to be a stand-up comedy performance in a low-stim environment. And this group, they only want people who are women, transgender, very occasionally people of color. Partly in this part of Canada, we don't have very many people of color, and a lot of the people of color here are right wing. So that's partly why it's very rare that matters. And this is the first one. They want people who are physically disabled. So I am friendly with one of the physically disabled comedians, and I sent this to him, and that I didn't grok that angle. I didn't think that he would see it as a disabled person, and he feels excluded because he's disabled, but he's not that left wing, Anyway, I sent this to one of the physically disabled comedians. I sent the link or screenshot of it saying, hey, I said, oh, this is perfect. They've finally come up with a pretext to explain the fact that there's no laughter. So you go to a stand-up comedy show and nobody's laughing, but they've framed this in such a way that it's a good thing that nobody's laughing and nobody's applauding because it's a low stim performance. So all right, so it's a calm, quiet environment in which we can just listen to these women tell autobiographical stories. Again, this in ways both shallow and profound. This reflects the ways in which the new left, the left wing of 2026 really can't participate in, can't possibly contribute to, stand-up comedy. They could come on YouTube and perform these autobiographical monologues. There could be some other venue, there could be some other way for them to use these talents positively. But guys, this is not really stand-up comedy anymore. Anyway, this comedian said to me, and by the way, I would assume he's politically a moderate in the center. I have no reason to think he's conservative or right-wing. He's just not far left enough to get along with these particular comedians. He could be left of center. I have no idea. But he said to me that even though he is physically disabled, he is not disabled enough to be welcome among that group of comedians. Again, I don't know how he feels about it. I know what he tells me about it. Meanwhile, a contrast worth thinking about, worth remembering. I was at one of these events, and the guy who is the venue manager, and as far as I know, he's also the owner of the venue, but he's the guy dealing with pouring drinks and mopping the floors every day. He's dealing with the day-to-day reality of this operation that includes stand-up comedy as one part of what they do. He came up to me and with really no context at all told me that he's a member of the Conservative Party. And he's not just any member. He pays the fees. He carries the card. He goes to the conferences. He really participates in, the elections and supporting and debating the policymaking process in the Conservative Party. He's a serious member of the Conservative Party. That's the first conversation I've ever had with that guy. And as of this moment, it's the last. We've never talked again since. So, it could have been completely spontaneous. It could have been at random. But he really came up to me. I was talking to some females, two women, reasonably good-looking women. And, it's possible he came up and told me this so that they would hear it. I don't know if there was any other reason or context to that. But I kind of interpreted this as, he's heard from other people that I'm right-wing. And he's telling me this. I mean, I think he kind of feels trapped in this social setting where the expectation is that each and every person is far, far left. Like anyone involved in the performing arts, and especially anyone involved in stand-up comedy, is going to be out on the leftmost fringe. So I think he was saying it expecting that I would be sympathetic. Now look, there is a certain sense in which I'm right-wing while being an atheist, while being vegan. Specifically the issue of sobriety ties me to the right wing. Specifically, matters of personal responsibility tie me to the right wing. I saw a comment on YouTube recently when I was doing the research for my comedy video. This is a real comedy video. Pure parody, pure satire. I did a comedy video about Somalians in America. So this controversy, it's linked to statements made by Donald Trump. If you guys hadn't heard, there was this big political explosion about Somali Americans. And there was a comment below one of the videos when I was putting together the materials for my own comedy video on the subject. There was a comment from a guy who said, look, I don't see this the way you conservatives do. He said, I'm right wing. I believe in personal responsibility. I believe in individual accountability only. I don't believe in collective punishment. Like, I don't believe in blaming the whole neighborhood. I don't believe in, whether or not it's racial or racist. Like, he was really taking an anti-collectivist, approach to this problem, where he says, look, you can't blame anyone other than the criminal. You can't blame Somalians or Somali immigrants or even this whole neighborhood of Somali immigrants. Like, no, you have to look at this in terms of individual responsibility. I found that quite touching. I found that quite moving. And I thought it was interesting. He was distinguishing himself morally from conservatives. He was saying, look, you conservatives, you're racist. You want collective punishment. You want to blame these people as a group or as a community. But that he was right wing and he only believes in individuals. Interesting. So look, the point of this video is not to reflect on these fine points of distinction, intellectual and ethical, that separate conservatives from the right wing. I'm here to tell you the way in which stand-up comedy has torn itself apart in this small town. And in my opinion, these same issues are present in New York, in Los Angeles, in London, England, in bigger and more influential scenes. I mean, Hollywood is dead and dying. But whatever form of comedy filmmaking will now emerge to replace it, quite possibly something like YouTube, some kind of low-budget internet movie making, I think these are political issues that are going to, put comedy in their shadow. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It will overshadow, the creative process for stand-up comedy and for comedic filmmaking. We're going through a period of time in which people, the majority of people, express their political identity primarily in terms of Israel. Their opposition to Israel, their support for Israel, in what sense exactly they are concerned about the welfare and human rights of Palestinians, so on and so forth, right? I said a minute ago, my political identity is actually primarily defined by sobriety. Like, my opposition to marijuana, my opposition to cocaine, across the board, my opposition even to antidepressants, psychiatric medication, mood-altering psychiatric medication, this kind of stuff, that puts me in a category of de facto right wing, even if I have nothing else in common with anybody else in the right wing. And, I don't really know if there is a right-wing position on ecology anymore. We all know what the conservative perspective is on ecology and on veganism. But if the right wing is now increasingly defined by this commitment to personal responsibility, individual responsibility, well, there's a question of individual responsibility for things like veganism, like diet, like ecology, ultimately like global warming. So we'll see. We'll see in the next 10 years whether the leftist collectivist approach or the right-wing individualist approach has more or less to say about ecology. It's it's hard to be optimistic. But I'll tell you one thing. Anyone left of center, even like the moderate left in the center, here in Canada and in the United States, the moderate center over to the left wing, all of those people are committed to making excuses for drugs and alcohol, the whole range, marijuana, vodka, biopsychiatry, antidepressant pills, decriminalizing cocaine, heroin, everything. Even to the extent of making excuses for mothers who use these drugs during pregnancy. Within the last 2 years, maybe within the last 1 year, I'm just forgetting exactly, but let's say within the last 2 years, I encountered two very different women who really loudly and angrily said to me that you can never blame the mother. Like, it doesn't, even if the mother is literally drinking alcohol and smoking cocaine during pregnancy, you can absolutely never blame the mother. It's never the mother's fault, right? Mothers are blameless for the mental disabilities of their children this way. These are two very different women. They're both extremely attractive. They're both very good-looking women. And there was not a lot of context for them saying this to me. It's not like we were having a conversation on that topic. Like, in both cases, it was a pretty abrupt jump cut to this woman saying this to me. And in both cases, these women had said it many times before. This was an almost rehearsed political statement on these issues. And, I did have to wonder, this kind of behavior, this is kind of like pick-me girl behavior inside out and backwards. Like, would this woman even be saying this to me if she weren't beautiful, if she weren't a woman? Can I imagine, an ugly, experienced, elderly woman saying this? Like maybe a woman who's taking care of disabled kids in some capacity for many years in her life, a woman who spent time with these drug-addicted mothers and their kids and trying to, like, someone who has that kind of hands-on experience. Would a man ever say this to me? And in both cases, those two women, what I do know is what they expected me to say in reply. Like, they were really expecting me to recognize them as virtuous, as extraordinary. Like, they were expecting me to say words like, good for you, in effect. So this is an extreme example, but the left-wing commitment to the moral absolution of drug addicts, the left-wing commitment, not just to tolerating drug addiction and alcoholism, but to really encouraging it, even including pregnant mothers, but obviously including men of all ages and so on and so forth, of trying to have a culture in which the sober minority carry and care for the drunken and drug-addicted majority, okay? That's a very deep difference between left and right that's going to last, and it means that for the foreseeable future, for the next 10 years, I am going to get perceived as right-wing or nothing at all. So I might as well identify myself as right-wing and describe myself as right-wing, even if the very next thing I have to say is, look, I'm an atheist and a vegan. So nobody else in the right wing is ever going to be my friend. All my friends and colleagues are going to be left of center because, veganism, ecology, and like atheism taken seriously, nihilistic atheism, I could never get along with anyone in the Conservative Party. So look, all these things come together. I had a conversation with Ed on the street. Must be 1 year ago now. Forget, many months ago, and this is in front of a comedy club. We're chopping up, and I'm chatting with a bunch of comedians. We're all getting along, and interestingly, Ed asks, "What are you?" That was his way of putting it. He's a comedian amongst comedians, and he makes a series of edgy statements about me being Jewish, to whatever extent. So he's asking me about the extent to which I'm Jewish and where I stand on Israel-Palestine. I just want to say, I do not fault him for this at all. I don't. And I think what he said to me in person on the street in that context, he would not say on Facebook, he wouldn't say on Twitter, he wouldn't say on Instagram. These were genuinely provocative, possibly offensive things he said about Judaism and Jewishness and Israel. But, this is a social context in which saying outrageous and shocking things is to be expected. And one of his jokes really made me laugh. I've got to say, he did manage to crack me up with these potentially, provocative, statements with these things. But I said something to him in the context of that conversation. Many of you will have heard me say this before. I said about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, I said, no, it's not complicated. It's very simple. There are two armies trying to determine which one will control a single plot of land. So in terms of political science, that's the simplest kind of conflict there is. I said, no. I said, I have a very simple right-wing perspective on the Israel-Palestine conflict. So, what my perspective is on this, I think he was expecting me to make some kind of long, mealy-mouthed statement about caring about human rights and the welfare of Palestinians. So I said, no. I see this as a very simple conflict between two sides. And one side teaches the theory of evolution in schools. One side is a secular republic, even if deeply flawed. And the other side does not. If you want to know what side I'm on in any given conflict, I'm on the side that teaches the theory of evolution. And I'm not on the side that denies the theory of evolution. Again, if you think about American conservatism, this is a big difference between me and probably the average member of the Republican Party in the United States. I think the average supporter of Donald Trump refuses to accept the theory of evolution in 2026, which is terrifying. So again, these values I have, they may not fit well into the left versus right distinction or dichotomy. Anyway, Ed was shocked, and he really stood there with his hand on his chin, and he said to me, approximately, that he had never met anyone who described themselves as right-wing before. Again, wasn't inappropriate, but at least in that moment, he was shocked. And I wonder if these two conversations I mentioned, I wonder if they were linked. It's totally possible Ed, told that other guy that I'm right-wing, and that's why that other guy came up to me on a different day, a couple weeks later or something, and a couple months later, whatever it was, and said that he himself is actually a member of the Conservative Party. Could be, could not be, what have you. There are a number of interesting things here. So as the months go by, Ed becomes the host of this comedy show that I'm eventually banned from, and that he himself eventually complains has become dominated by this question of Israel and anti-Semitism. That comedians are getting on stage, and in his words, they are saying things about the Jews. They're saying things that condemn the Jews. I'm assuming they're jokes and not just lectures. I'm assuming these are statements that have punchlines, but I don't know. Again, a lot of the left of center comedy, it's just lecturing the audience, whether that's telling them about your divorce, just autobiographical lecturing, or it's making political statements. This is a problem with left of center and left wing comedy in the 2020s. Is this comedy at all? But the very show I was banned from for not being left-wing enough, if you like, it then proceeded to tear itself apart for these left-wing issues. In an era when the majority of people, their primary political identity is defined in terms of the Israel versus Palestine conflict. This is not new. During coronavirus, so now many, many years ago, I remember making a video talking about the extent to which the Green Party of Canada, so a political party that is supposed to be all about ecology and environmentalism, the Green Party of Canada had totally torn itself apart along the pro-Israel, anti-Israel axis. Now, not everyone who is anti-Israel is anti-Semitic, but they overlap. I mean, in terms of the Venn diagram here, a very large percentage of people who are anti-Israel are also anti-Semitic. Just to throw out another example, a very large percentage of people who glorify the Vikings are neo-Nazis. If you're really a fan of like Viking culture, religion, history, and civilization, it's possible. It's possible. It's you could have any political perspective or persuasion, but there's an overlap. There's a shocking overlap. There's a correlation on that Venn diagram, right? So the Green Party of Canada now has this long history over decades of allowing the Israel-Palestine conflict to preempt serious questions of ecology, serious questions that should include veganism. Like, is this going to be a vegan party? Yes, no, maybe. Are we going to recognize the unbelievable importance of a vegan diet in terms of what our carbon dioxide emissions are, and under many other headings, the importance of a vegan diet this way? And look, there's a sense in which I could say to you that the war in Israel is not going to go on forever. But there's a sense in which I can say the opposite. Like, you better get used to it. This conflict is never going to end. Like, it's not the case that, even if Iran is bombed into being a parking lot, even if the Gaza Strip is bombed to the point of being a parking lot, even if now southern Lebanon is reduced to being a parking lot, there is a sense in which this conflict cannot possibly end in the next 50 years. Now, some of you still have 50 years left to live, and some of you don't. And we don't know who's who yet, right? But if you are planning what you are going to do with your life as a creative artist, creatively or destructively or politically, you really have to ask this question in a very pragmatic way. Are you going to let the Israel-Palestine conflict preempt your own research interests in life? Again, your own interests as a creative artist, your own interests as a potentially political intellectual. And if you really care about this so much, quote one of the oldest catchphrases in the history of nihilism, go to the people, be the people. If you really care about the Israel-Palestine conflict, go to Israel, live in Israel. And to whatever extent is possible, cross over the line, spend time in the Palestinian territories, and cross back. I don't think it is possible to really live, continuously in the Palestinian territories, but there are plenty of people who do that, who get accustomed to coming and going across that dotted line for day trips, for short excursions, and get to know those people and their problems. And your perspective on this will change. I remember interviews with American soldiers, left-wing men in the American military. They were all men, no women, who had changed sides to support communism in North Korea. So these were guys who'd been deployed. They'd been sent one way or another to, the Korean War, or what we call the DMZ. They were out in the Koreas, and they decided as a matter of principle they would reject American imperialism and they would support North Korean communism. And in these interviews, they get asked in whatever words, so at what point did you realize you made a mistake? At what point, did you regret this decision you made? And a typical answer, like an answer I've seen, was, oh, right away. Like within the first day, they regretted this. Maybe some of them said within the first month or within the first few weeks. But I don't remember anyone even saying it took a full year. Like as soon as they were living in that communist context, as soon as they saw the reality of what North Korean communism was, they realized, whoa, 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 whoa. Now I understand what we were fighting for. And maybe that was never articulated to them very well. Maybe they weren't able to figure it out. Like the morality of American imperialism may be hard to see short term. But again, you go there, go to the people, be the people. Okay, but you go to Korea and you live amongst the Koreans, North and South, so to speak, right? Okay, now I understand that the distinction between North and South in Korea is worth fighting for. Okay. It's an imperfect parallel. But I'm telling you, whether you think of yourself as left-wing or not, whether you identify as left-wing or not, go to the people, be the people. If you want this to be your primary political identity, okay, go and live with the contradictions in Israel. And you are going to figure out there are some Israelis who are more religious than some Muslims. Some Muslims are secular, some Muslims are atheists, right? And you are going to see the struggle of secular people to lead a meaningful life. You're going to see how hard it is to be an atheist in a Muslim majority society, and you're going to see how hard it is to be an atheist in a Jewish dominated society. And you are going to figure out which side you're really on and what really is worth fighting for.